Namaste.
Namaste, Sraddhalu. Namaste, everyone, and welcome to Evenings with Sraddhalu. I'm going to share an experience with you before he begins, because today is the birthday of Madhav Pandit, and this is a story about him. We go far back into the 1970s, in fact, early 1970, when there was a camp built for the workers of the Matrimandya in a place that the mother named Peace. The camp was built for us. We had a kitchen, a dining room, rooms for everyone, and a meditation room. Now, Matrimandya had not even begun, and there was only one lone palm tree, which is still there, and dusty, dirty roads, and every week, faithfully, Madhav came out to the meditation room, and we all gathered, and he spoke to us about Mother and Sri Aurobindo and the integral yoga. And even more than that, he answered all the questions we asked with love and with graciousness. It is a moment I will never forget. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Narad. Thank you. That was precious. I remember as a child going once, maybe a few times, to Aurobindo, and at that time Matrimandir was just one big hole, and even the cementing had not started. And there was a little hut on the side, and Panditji used to give talks there. And I think it was under the mother's instructions that the theme for the talks were the synthesis of yoga. Because all the people working there at the Matrimandir were, in some sense, aligned to the integral yoga, not necessarily fully conscious participants or dedicated to integral yoga, but at least aligned to. And the work they were doing for the Matrimandir was in the spirit of pure karma yoga. And so those talks were also significant in helping those who were committed to the higher ideal to find the means and the form in which their daily work, and sometimes very laborious and strenuous, could be turned towards the divine and made a means for the sadhana. So at that time, I just remember being there and nothing much more. But the atmosphere was unusual in that you had this huge desert, you had this big hole in the middle of the desert, and then a little hut, and people often half bare-bodied because it was so hot, and then concentrating on this theme and dedicating their lives to this. And that's really where you get the glimpse of the seeds or the foundations of what built Aurobindo. And Narad was a part of this. You are still one of the seeds of Aurobindo. We had invited questions from many of the viewers. So there are some questions as well as some comments and experiences shared. So I will start with some of the shared experiences and then move to the questions, and we'll see how the theme unfolds. Today is Madhav Pandit Ji's 107th birth anniversary. For those who are not familiar with the Indian terms, the G at the end, JI is how we would write it in English, is a mark of respect, equivalent to what you see in Japan with the term san at the end. And it can be applied to men or women equally. With a female, you would still put a G, or a male, you can put a G, and it's just a term of respect. So Madhav, his first name, Pandit, his last name. So Madhav Pandit Ji. And for many of us, even to say Madhav Pandit, something within goes, that's not respectful enough. Here's somebody who deserves respect. You feel that. And so you have to add a G. There's a similar term in Tamil with the name of Kapali Shastri. You say Kapali Shastri, and then you feel that's not respectful enough. So the term in Tamil is the Shastri becomes Shastri Ar. You add the Ar, which is an equivalent of the G. You add an Ar, and Shastri Ar is the respectful way of expressing the name. So if you find these variations coming, Pandit, Pandit Ji, or Shastriyar, you will understand the context in which that happens. And it's almost natural for when you grow up with that kind of a culture of spontaneous respect. I remember a similar experience with, and it happens, it's something deep rooted, it's not just cultural. You will remember this incident of somebody seeing Sri Aurobindo on the battlefield in the middle of the Second World War, John Kelly. And he says when he first saw this image and he didn't know who it was, he said, Sir, because he's in the military and his first term is Sir. And he said, that's not good enough. This man is something so deep, it needs something more than just Sir. So in the book, he says, he spontaneously said, Great Sir. So it's the equivalent of Sir G or Sir with an addition of prefix or suffix of respect. So I start with first one sharing, which is from Revati, which was in the comments of this morning's video, which was webcast. For those of you who might like to watch that, this morning at 6 a.m. we had the prayer, which we do every year on Panditji's birthday. Initially, he would himself do the prayer, and at some point, he had me join him and do the prayer with him. And over the years, he did 2 or 3 variations of what he chose as prayer. But this particular one, which we did, which is called Paramashtakam, is the one he consistently did for many years before he left his body. So that's the one which I am also continuing in the same style of recitation that he was doing. So, and following that, we had a little sharing of certain aspects of his life or our experience with his life. Over the years, sometimes we've invited others to share their experiences. Today, it was just that I shared something, and also something about the background of the house in which the repairs are currently going on. So, those of you who would like to watch that, it was webcast this morning, and then we uploaded a high resolution. The original webcast didn't have the clear audio, so we uploaded the high resolution version. So I come to Revati's comment, which was in the comments list after. She said, wanted to share my personal experience here with Panditji, though I have not met him in this lifetime. When I decided a few years ago that I would have to start doing seriously what it takes to progress towards the divine, the word psychic being intrigued me a lot. Having no clue about what it could mean, I read a book about it and couldn't figure it out at all. One evening, I was watching Panditji's videos. I don't remember the topic now. Initially, I was listening to it very casually, but as the video came to a close, I erupted into tears and wept uncontrollably. Along with those tears came the feelings of pure love for the divine. How grateful was I for this precious experience. Later, I always repented that I couldn't meet this beautiful child of the divine in this lifetime. But now I have found one and will not waste this precious opportunity. So, in this experience, while listening to Panditji's talk, she tuned in to the consciousness from which he was speaking. And it's quite possible, quite likely that the talk she is speaking of might have been one of those that we uploaded on the YouTube channel. There are only 3 or 4, I think. One of them was on divine love. It could have been that, but whatever it was, doesn't matter. The experience that came spontaneously, the tears and this pure love for the divine, is the consequence of the psychic being coming forward naturally. And this was one of the things which we spontaneously experienced in Panditji's presence. Because in his consciousness, that was such a strong influence that just being in his space, it tended to happen in you. If you tended to be there long enough, eventually either you would partly cover yourself so as not to be overwhelmed. And this is something we had also with those who were working with the mother. Or you would get so used to it that you wouldn't realize that something had shifted. because you tended to live in that. So, nevertheless, it was that as one of the transmissions of his consciousness, by which he helped people to grow spiritually. And this is there not only in his video recordings, in his chantings, in his writings equally, you feel this as you read. But you must make that special effort to tune in. And it's interesting that Revati observes initially it was casual listening, but also on the surface there's something casual, but on an inner level something says, yes, but this is so precious, and tunes in, and the link forms there. So this is a beautiful sharing, and for many it will remind you of your own experience perhaps. And the interesting part also is you don't have to have met him physically. It's the transmission of the quality of the consciousness that is important. We have also another sharing from a few sharings from Maya. So she has written, many of us might have already all of Panditji's books on our bookshelves at home, but I feel that each time we reprint one of his books or we give one of his books to someone for the first time, it's as if it is newly coming into the world for the first time with its full force, because Panditji's books are special. They are not just collections of words that make us feel positive and intellectually inspired. They are that too. But more importantly, they are a testament to his ability to directly transmit an experience and a state of consciousness. Last year, we reprinted Life Beautiful. And when proofreading, one cannot skim read, but one has to pay attention to each word. And in that book, especially when he speaks of bliss, delight, beauty, love, God as Shama Sundara, you could feel each quality in your heart. Each word was as if a bundle of energy that opened and gifted that quality to us. The word became the reality. In this way, for those of us who did not get to meet him in this lifetime, the books are a valuable receptacle of his consciousness when read in the right attitude. And this is why Panditji once said that for as long as the Mother's and Sri Aurobindo's writings remain in the world, his books will be present too, acting as a gateway and a guide to their philosophy, ideas, and consciousness. So this is from Maya. She has a couple of more observations, but also questions. So we'll look at these now. In his book, Flame of White Light, Panditji describes how his teacher Kapali Shastri opened his subtle sight so that he could see the mother as a vast column of white light as she walked up and down on the ashram terrace. This is just one of the many ways that Kapali helped to shape young Madhav's growing consciousness. As Panditji then in turn helped you. But why is this practical tradition of parampara so rare here in the ashram compared to other traditions? In your experience, was it the love and surrender to your teacher that made you so receptive to him? Okay. I had not read the questions in advance in this case, but so it's a surprise. Yes, that experience which he narrates was, I had also heard of this from others who we interviewed, who were sadhaks or disciples of the ashram from the early years. So I'll just broaden the scope of and the background. You see, in the ashram main building, the mother's room had not been built yet. I believe it was built after 1960, maybe 61, 62, I don't know exactly. But before that, it was just a flat terrace. Not even a balcony, just a flat terrace on top. And it seems every Sunday, the mother would wash her hair and then go out on the open terrace and walk up and down to dry her hair in the sun. So it was long flowing hair, really long. That's the descriptions we have heard. So I heard this from several people whom we had interviewed in the late 1980s. And many sadhakas would come to their balcony or terrace because Pondicherry was quite flat. Most buildings did not have more than a ground and first floor. So if you went to your ground floor's terrace or even first floor terrace, you could see the ashram top. And she was right there on top. And I remember one of the sadhaks, I don't know who it was, perhaps it was Amal Kiran, saying, it was such a beautiful experience. You would just be mesmerized. But what is it that they were seeing as beauty? It's difficult for us to comprehend because we are only thinking in terms of physical form. The fact is, behind the physical form and inhabiting in the physical form is her full consciousness. And what is the nature and form of that? You see, if you recognize that this physical form of the mother was an embodiment incarnating in body of the divine mother, of the cosmic divine Shakti, then what is behind that? And how do you glimpse that? So now we come to the incident of Kapali Shastriyar. He too would be on his terrace and with Panditji standing next to him as a young man. And Shastriyar commented to him that he sees the mother in this form, which is the column of white light. In the Indian tradition, there is the description of the divine, and in this case, in the story, it is Shiva, and the Shiva Linga is representation of that, as a column of light that goes upward into infinity and downward into infinity. And so it is something in that direction. I will not say it is identical, but something in that direction that he was seeing is this massive column of light, but extending into infinity, upward and downward. And he comments this, and Panditji, of course, at that point is not seeing it. And then Kapali casually leaned over and touched the center of his forehead with his fingertip. And Panditji narrates how his inner sight opened at that point, and he shared in that experience of seeing the mother as a column of white light. There is another incident which is also narrated by Amita Sen, which Narad has recorded, and I have not seen it, but it was narrated to me. So I just recall from what I had heard indirectly, but those of you who would like can watch that also. She speaks of how once she went to the mother. At that time, she was this young girl in the ashram school, and very talented, very capable. Mother was building her, training her for various things. And one day she goes to the mother and says, "Mother, are you divine? How do we know? What's the proof?" And the mother smiled and said nothing. But then Amita narrates how the next day when she came, the mother was already ready. She had prepared this condition. And as soon as she came in front, the mother stood up with her hand raised, and immediately she saw the mother as this massive column of light, the incarnation of divinity. And that was it was a shock, but also the revelation and the evidence that she needed in experience. So there are such experiences people have had, and I'm sharing these different angles to give you the picture of what it's like. Quite objective for many because we have so many common experiences. At the same time, it required the opening of the inner sight. Why didn't mother show it the first day when she asked the question? I have a rationale which I will express in the way I understand it. The way you come with this block, hey, are you this? You have already a filter of question and doubt. So mother waited for her to come the next day and surprised her where the filter would not come in the way. And by surprising, she could bypass that filter and give her the experience more directly. So you have to understand that these experiences are accessible to all of us. When you're receptive, it can be given easily. When there are blocks within you or layers which prevent, then the effort to give you the experience has to kind of cut through those layers. In Panditji's case, he was naturally open. All it needed was a little nudge, and that's how it was given. So that's the background of the incident Maya is referring to. So her question is more about this parampara is a term used to describe how a certain body of consciousness or experience is passed down through generations. So why is it not there in the ashram or is rare in the ashram? Simply because the center in this case is always Sri Aurobindo and the mother. The parampara is always directly from the mother and Sri Aurobindo because they are present. In lineages where that is not the case, where the founder goes away, is no more actively present, then there has to be somebody who, so to say, carries and transmits, hands over the power of the tradition or the infused consciousness through the generations. And then a lot depends on the maintenance of this power or its purity or the vehicle which can hold or not, or sometimes it is dissipated in time. So that is the necessity for it comes there. When the teacher is directly present, there is no such necessity. So I would not even call this in that sense a parampara in that sense. Nevertheless, one has the benefit of one who is close enough to in the experience that you is able to assist others to wake up. That's how Kapali Shastri could give him that. Panditji could give Panditji that experience. But to each, what was given was according to their capacity, and always the underlying principle is that it is the mother's force that works. So I don't think there will ever be, in that sense, the form of a parampara. Nevertheless, there will always be what I would call elders within a community who have certain experiences, who assist those who may or may not have had it, or in that way help each other. And that's more like a spiritual family that that forms, where you have elders and youngers. It's kind of a peer learning framework. But her question ends with, in your experience, was it the love and surrender to your teacher that made you so receptive to him? Yes, this I will surely agree to, because I believe that makes a huge difference. In my own experience with my teacher, Panditji, I had always a natural opening, and somehow from deep within me, it was a clear sense of recognition that here was a pure source, and I could open fully without distrust, without hesitation. And equally, when I met others in the ashram community, because I had exposure a lot through many, including many elders, some of whom were quite extraordinary also, I did not always feel that spontaneous trust where I could just open without hesitation. And this is a very important factor, where if intuitively one sensed either a mixture or something uncomfortable, and so one kept closed. With Panditji, I had that, and I could literally, I remember rushing home from the school physical training programs, coming home in a relief. It's like I've just got out from a highly tense and suffocating space, and I come home and I breathe freely now. And by then, Panditji's talks would have started at 6:30 p.m. So I would rush in and sit down and just open to the light and just bathe. That experience I remember. Today, it's difficult to understand how that could happen so easily. It was obviously from a deeper part which recognized and could freely open. That made a huge difference. Nevertheless, there was a point of transition which I want to share. And I think that's the whole point of today's session, to draw out certain experiences and perhaps in putting them on record, help others, help those who may have similar or not. There was a point of transition which was critical, which was just after I had completed my education in the formal education in the ashram school at the age of 21. We completed on October 31st. And then there was a holiday period, through November and till 15th of December. 16th of December, formal school classes started again. So many people who completed the education, it's a structure which has been there in the ashram, that the students are given a chance to join the ashram as formal residents of the ashram community, or they may leave and continue their life elsewhere. So at the point where you complete your education, you have that choice. And all those who have that choice, typically what I understand was they would go through the holiday period and from 16th of December start working in some department of the ashram as it was assigned. And at that time it was Ravindraji who was assigning these. And when I completed, I said, but I'm already an ashram inmate resident because the mother had already accepted me as a child. So I don't see why I should go through a holiday period for that. I'm already there. I just start the very next day. So on completing my formal education, I went to Ravindraji, and that was the way it worked, that he would assign you the work. And he wrote on a very tiny strip of paper, which was torn from an envelope. I suppose that was his style. And he wrote in very scrawled handwriting and assigned me to a specific work in the ashram dining room at the servants' counter, where servants would come and food would be given for taking home. Now, I remember the scene at the servants' counter. Noisy, chaotic, crude, harsh, dark, heavy, and even walking by, because of the clutter of the servants, and it was a gaggle of voices, noises, some of them very coarse, crude desires, seeing the food and the desires rising. I remember that scene because as a young person, I was very sensitive and it was suffocating. And he had given me work right there. So I come home with that slip and I gave it to Pandit. He was my support. He was my reference, base of reference. It was very simple. Whatever was happening, I placed it in his hand. He looked at it and then he said, no. He gave a reason. He said, it will harm the spiritual development. And he was right. And he said, no, you will not go. So I said, what do I do? He said, just go and tell them that you cannot go. And nothing else was said about it. And I said, I will wait till whatever time it takes, 16th of December. And I left it to that. Then there was a further intervention. At that point, Jayantilal, who was looking after the ashram archives, founder of the ashram archives, approached Panditji and said, I hear that Sraddhalu is available to join the ashram and he's specializing in computers. We need someone with that capacity. Can you please ask him if he would be willing to work with us? And so Panditji came to me and he said, well, Jayantilal has asked, would you like to do that? And what was the other option? And he asked me, I said, I don't know much, but through the young years, my mother had ensured every holiday that we had, November, December, living in the ashram anyway, she would make sure I was working in one of the departments of the ashram. So through the years, starting even, I think just after kindergarten, I worked in the bicycle repair shop and then the air conditioning section and then the electronics section, the electrical workshop section, quite a few, and the watch repair section. So anything that interested me, and I was technically oriented. So every year I would wander through these different experiences, learning those things hands-on to whatever extent at that age one could. And so in my mind, I said, well, I would like to be with machines. And so maybe the electric workshop would be the other option. But then he said, Jayantilal in the archives. And I said, wow, I don't know if I'm worthy of that kind of technological competence. I don't know if I am. And he asked me, what would you like? And I would have normally wanted to make a choice. And I said, this is not for me to choose. What I would have done to the mother, I would have said, what you want. And I just did that with Panditji. I said, whatever you choose. He said, you go to archives. Briefly, I had a hesitation because I don't know if I'm competent enough. I had no idea what was required and what I can do. But it was obviously the right decision in terms of environment, in terms of possibilities of growth intellectually, but also in the purity of the atmosphere spiritually as it was required. And then later, Jayantilal put a special request to Ravindra ji, and from Ravindra, the thing came, the final sanction. He said, oh, I'm very happy you're going there. And that was it. So I'm sharing this in some detail to show you that point of transition where I could have made a choice and I said, no, what the mother wants. And for me, Panditji was transparent. He was directly expressing what mother wanted. I said, whatever you choose. But from that moment on, where that decision was made, I stayed in that state for a period of nearly a year, maybe 1.5 years. And every day I would go with him to the ashram. He was going to the ashram office where he was working. Before going to the office, he would go to the meditation hall and we would go to 3 points in the meditation hall. And he made me go through that. There was a place where he would put, I think it was in those days, 1 rupee or 2 rupee note every day as an offering in the offering box. And he made me do that. So he was, so to say, as if training me with certain values. And so I was doing that every day. And then I would go with him to the office. He would be ready to sit on his chair. At that point, I would bow like this. He would touch me on the forehead. And then I would walk away to go to the archives. My day started like this every day. What happened then and the experience which followed, I will keep for later in our discussion. But that was an exceptional experience. But that experience he could transmit because I was in that receptive state. So I'm coming to Maya's question, the love and surrender to your teacher that made you so receptive to him. Yes, of course. But the degree of that, and there was a huge shift in the extent to which it was there. It was literally as I would be with the mother. And I would not recommend that you do that with anybody. He was transparent enough that it was possible to do that. But otherwise, the human mix is always dangerous and the mix can easily get warped. And so always you be that way, open to the mother and Sri Aurobindo. But in this rare case, we had that advantage that someone who was transparent enough that one could be like this. And it was in that condition, in that state of openness, that for a year and a half nearly, there was a powerful transmission. And I will still remember that as the most accelerated, the most beautiful, the most exceptional phase of the sadhana ever. But I was doing nothing. I was just like this. And every day he was infusing this. But what happened there, I've shared before, but I will keep for later maybe and go more in detail later. So this is in regard to this question from Maya. And then what can you share? In the next question, what can you share what it was like to grow up in the same house as Panditji, and what are your fondest memories of that time, as well as the most important lesson that you learned? Uh, being in the daily atmosphere with Panditji was, of course, quite overwhelming in terms of the pressure of the presence. I saw how he had several assistants, secretaries. Basanti was handling the editing, the proofreading, and part of the correspondence. My mother was handling the house, and then later part of some of the communications and some of the work in the office, handling the books in the godown. There were two other people in the office who were helping with the office work itself. At some point, Panditji's sister also began to go to the office. But what I was seeing was the whole group around was running through the whole day. Panditji was working all the time, but you never had the sense that he was in a stress. He was doing more work than all these. They were running to keep up with his pace. And that's quite remarkable achievement, that one man is doing so much that others have to keep up, and not one, but several people are struggling to keep up. It was quite an achievement. And I see it and I can describe it, but I still don't know how he did it. It was a certain state of consciousness. And somehow that became my reference. And I naturally got pulled into that mode of working at a very high pace. And later I found it didn't work for me. It was building up a certain kind of a stress and I could not sustain it. I was missing something in what he had, in his ability to master time. Despite all this, where he was doing so much, if he had to go for a talk or if he had a meeting, if he was going for a talk, for example, he would be ready half an hour before. It's a talk in Pondicherry. The journey will take maybe 10 minutes. He's ready half an hour before, sitting fully fresh and ready. And the person is going to come after 15 minutes, but he's ready. And he was never at any point you felt that he was in a state of stress or tension. He was always ahead of time. And this is something so difficult to understand or describe. Time is moving at a certain pace, and he's ahead of that. So he's never stressed. He's waiting for time to catch up. He's waiting for circumstances and people to catch up, but he's moving. And that's quite a remarkable thing. And it has to do with a certain state of consciousness in which he lived. So this is perhaps one of the important lessons which I still say, I cannot say I've fully learned, but I observed this and it showed that it's possible. And of course, there are many other things which maybe as we go along will come. But this is one of the things which immediately strikes me. There's another question from Maya. You recall that Panditji joined the ashram for good in 1939. He had the curious desire to travel to Pune by plane. He thought that once he joined the ashram, he would have little opportunity or desire to travel. Little did he know how much he would travel later on. So he wrote to Sri Aurobindo asking his permission, and Sri Aurobindo replied in pencil, he can fly. So in those days, of course, putting a parenthetical comment, everything was done with permission of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. There was also the understanding that in such matters, there was a natural protection required. So everything was done with permission. Sri Aurobindo said he can fly. So Panditji recounts this was his first communication to him, and it thrilled him to the core. And Panditji writes, I mattered, didn't I? Later on, he recounts he initially only stayed on in the ashram for the mother, for her personality, for her love. The sadhana, the philosophy, the ideal came later on, he says. Yes, he says that, but the fact is there is also the call of the soul. So there are these two layers, on the surface personality and then the deeper call of the soul. He would not have come to the ashram just for the personality, because he had not met them yet. So having come, he had already decided to commit. So they were both present actually. On the surface part, one can say that was a priority and this was not consciously perhaps. So I'm just making a comment. So she continues, the sadhana philosophy, the ideal came later. Later on, he says, there is another story where Sri Aurobindo left his physical body. One particular sadhak who was very close to Sri Aurobindo left the ashram. There were several, in fact. When someone asked Panditji how someone like that could leave, Panditji said that it meant his aspiration wasn't sincere enough, that he was only there for the special attention and place he was given by Sri Aurobindo. And when that stopped after the physical passing of Sri Aurobindo, his vital lost interest in staying there. So my comments, it's often the personality of the guru, the love that the guru or teacher showers on us that draws us to the path, at least externally. But then after the initial golden moment has passed, the phase of closeness and learning on the physical plane, our inner being must come forward and bring forth its sincerity, its perseverance, the tapasya that it has gathered over lifetime, so that even if the physical support is not there, we will not falter in our aspiration. Mother once said that once you set foot on this path, you must walk on till the end. The children here in the school, as part of the physical education, have a prayer. Mother, we want to be thy faithful soldiers to fight for thy final victory. And Mother replies, I salute you, my brave little soldiers. I give you my call to the rendezvous with victory. So Maya adds, it is my wish that we remember Panditji today not only in the affection and love, but as an example of someone who, even after physical passing of his teacher, Kapalish Shastriyar, and his guru, the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, kept progressing in his sadhana, in the collective work, kept looking to the future, which is the mother's future, and is still together with her, marching for her final victory. So yes, I agree with that. Though we must understand that there are always layers. And the outer part is the part which has these issues. The inner part is the one which knows. If there has not been the work of integration of the inner and the outer, then this kind of a problem can happen where the outer gets hijacked or pulled, pushed, or diverted from the path even. And if the person has not aligned these two, one can easily lose those opportunities. And when one goes off the path after having been accepted, that's when there is also a spiritual loss. But it's different from when you're trying out, exploring before you finally settle on the path, or before you're formally accepted by, in this case, the divine. Again, I want to make a clear distinction here, because in the Indian tradition, this word guru is highlighted. And so you say the guru has accepted. But it's not the same everywhere. It's not the same when the guru is merely a normal person who takes a position of a teacher. And there is no spiritual consequence when you leave. So I've seen people who will take this truth, this principle, and say, oh, but I was accepted by ex-guru, so now I cannot leave and it will be spiritually wrong, or I'm eternally grateful to him because he helped me at a point when whatever. Not all are, in that sense, representing the divine consciousness. Not everywhere that you've met somebody who's a good teacher, should you say, this guru represents the divine. One can take that position provisionally or as a matter of convenience, but it's not always true. And often today, what you see as teachers or even famous gurus, and famous because you can pay YouTube or do some advertising and become famous overnight. It's not a big deal to acquire fame. By itself does not mean a spiritual relationship, nor that the person is spiritually even competent to do that. I had seen in one particular case, one of these famous persons, I happened to be in their space and on a special occasion for a program. And so he was spontaneously dancing and with all his crowd of followers adoring. And they'd make like a catwalk for him. So as he's walking and dancing, and then somebody asked him a question and he told them, give me all your problems, give me the burden of your karma. And then suddenly he says in the mic, it's all amplified with the mic. He says, you don't want to give me your karmas, you don't want to give me your burdens. And I said to myself, this man actually does not know what he's asking for. It's so dangerous what he was doing at that point. And he did not have the spiritual even grounding to be able to do something like that. But he was playing a role, and one can play roles, and the followers can play roles, but nowhere is there a spiritual relationship. And just because you say, I'm going to dedicate my life to this person, if the person is not really anchored in the divine consciousness, you are kind of being misled in a way. So I'm warning about this, because you have to be clear. When is it truly the case? When there is a recognition of the soul seeing the divine in or through the person. Then you could say, yes, this is it, or this is my guru, or this is my path. But it cannot come just from a vital attraction or a moment's exaltation. So again, I've given an example of exaltation because somebody was sharing this, and he said, again, it's one such person in the audience, and this person is on the stage, and then suddenly the person in the audience started shivering and shaking and went into some kind of state of heightened excitation. And so for many, it was a dramatic example of the guru's power or the teacher's power. And to me, it was an example of a vital excitation, which is easy to do either if there's a vital being attached to that person, or if the person has some weakness and energetically there's a transmission of vital energy which destabilizes him. So again, these are not to me soul experiences. A soul experience is of a very different kind, where deep within you, something wakes up and recognizes and knows. And there you cannot go, you cannot say, but I'm wondering, I found something better, or is there something better? There's a recognition at a depth. So again, be very careful about applying these examples, generalizing to just any situation. And I'll give one more last example of this. There was an event, a special event that was happening in the ashram, and there was a couple from another country who were very keen, and it was a deep aspiration for them to be present for that, and it would have been for them life-changing. They were to come, but they had some person that they considered their guru. That man got jealous. He felt he was going to lose them. So he insisted that one of the couple come with him and forced him to go on a tour with him. And that man was struggling because he knew this is what he wanted. And afterwards, he went through great severe depression. And afterwards, the other partner told me that, oh, finally now he feels he has been able to make the surrender. And I said, that's not a surrender. He was broken. His will was broken by that man in a control relationship, where he imposed his will to the point where the man struggling eventually broke and gave up. What is interesting is he never came afterwards to the ashram because his will was broken. After that, he would be just this puppy following that man. And it was not a spiritual relationship. It was not a spiritual guru. I'm giving these are very serious examples. One has to be very careful about what it is that we speak of when we speak of a true commitment and the place of the guru and this kind of a total dedication. For most of us who have experienced this contact with Sri Aurobindo and the mother, it's simple because the nature of that is so obvious. It's not always so obvious in other relationships. Even when somebody has a spiritual attainment, it's not always that the person is so transparent where you can give yourself and dedicate so totally. And I'm saying this having had that experience, obviously having, of course, at a very young age met with the mother, but having had that experience with Panditji and seen his purity and transparency. And then after that, having met many of the senior disciples of the ashram who were genuinely senior people, and then seeing also their limitations. And after that, I've met many teachers and of a very high order from practically all the major traditions of the world through the years because of certain programs that I was part of. And having seen all that, I can say very few. And I can say I have met some people in certain traditions who were worthy of that a disciple in that tradition could actually commit totally to them in the path that they were taught in the tradition. Outside that path, the person had no competence. But within that path, the person was transparent enough to lead you to what that tradition could offer. Yes, there were, I would say, less than a handful that I have seen across all these years. So it is very rare to find people like that, and one has to be truly honest with oneself. If for whatever reason you say, ah, yes, this is all I have, and later you find something deeper and truer, you should be able to see which is your soul's choice and go by that. So this is just as an addition, a comment to what Maya has shared. Rajan has interesting sharing. For Panditji's birthday, I have an observation and a couple of questions. As you may recall, Panditji was my father's guide. I clearly remember the day he visited our house and ate a meal. He visited our puja room and remarked on the good vibrations there. It was a very memorable day that we all cherished. So Rajan was a young man at that point. One of the anecdotes my father mentioned was about a time he thought he was having some difficulty in meditation. As I recall, Panditji asked my father to meditate, followed along, and then told my father that he was fine, that he could proceed. I could not even conceive how one person can follow another in the meditation like that. Perhaps you could shed some light on it. Next is a quote you will recognize, and he's quoting: every morning as I bowed to him at the ashram before leaving for my work, when his finger touched my forehead, I was aware of something distinct flowing in. Oh, this is a quote from one of the talks I had given. Over time, it grew in form and density, and I noticed that at the moment that his finger touched my forehead, a ball of golden liquid light entered the forehead and gently moved down into the chest, where it softly burst to fill the entire cardiac center. The heart center was suffused with the light and warmth of a melting love. So he's quoting from one of my talks. And then he asks, these are of course your words in Panditji's centenary commemoration. I wonder if you could elaborate on this experience. Would it be correct to equate this with the descent of peace, but perhaps brought about through Panditji's mere touch? No, this is a different experience. The descent of peace is a different experience, where something which is experienced above the head as the presence of the divine, of the self, or of a deep peace of the self, or one of the powers of the self, is felt above the head and then descends and fills you. It's a different line of experience, which is one of the descent. This was an experience of the consciousness entering all the way towards the psychic center and creating a path to the psychic presence. So he's asking, will you elaborate on this experience? Okay. I had intended to keep this elaboration towards the end, but we'll use this occasion. And this is what I had mentioned earlier. Before going to my work in the archives, I would momentarily bow down before Panditji, and he would touch. And just, often it was the central middle finger, sometimes index, but mostly just the middle finger like this. And we had already experienced, all of us felt when we would touch his feet or he would place his hand, you felt this warmth and very loving warmth that filled you. And it was spiritual consciousness. That's how you familiarized with that quality of the consciousness. You recognized it. It was so distinct. He was such a container of this juice, this liquid of spiritual consciousness. He touched and then you were filled with it. So even bowing down to his feet, it was like that. You touched his feet and you felt this, and it filled you, and you were in a different state. You got used to it. So after a point, it was normal. You expected it. I remember about a month before he left his body. It was very strange. He had already begun the withdrawal. And about a month before, we were doing the morning prayer. After the prayer, I bowed down. I placed my head on his feet and I felt nothing. It was hollow. It was empty. And it was a deep sadness somewhere within me. And I said, oh my God. The process of withdrawal had started. And it was a shell almost. He had begun to withdraw majorly already by that point. And the spiritual force also had begun to withdraw. That's when he stopped meeting people, because there's no point meeting him in that state, in meeting people in that state. Because what is the point? The point is precisely what he was transmitting. Once that has been withdrawn, what is the point of meeting? So I remember this very distinctly. And at that point, it's one of the sad things. I said, my God. And I knew what it was. And he read my mind, and I knew that he had read my mind. And almost in guilt or in embarrassment, I turned away, avoiding his look. It was very interesting. So I'm coming back to the main experience. So he would touch here and the juice fills you. So I was used to that. And then it went on for days, for weeks. And I don't know when. One day I noticed that every time he was doing this, it's as if there was a general descent, there was general presence, but it was almost like a little ball of liquid was going in and going inside. And I've described it as a ball of liquid golden. That's how it felt, marble size. And I could feel it going in and then going down all the way to the chest, and then here bursts out. And with that, it's as if something within my heart opens. Beautiful experience. And I was so happy. I was in this different state, and I'm coming out from the office. Everything is so happy, and I'm in this exalted. But I don't know any other word in the English language except some kind of blissful. But it is not the divine bliss. It is a deep joy, but of that grade or the quality of the bliss. So something of the psychic consciousness is what I would describe it as. And I would be so happy, and I would look around, and everything was so beautiful. The air was glowing. Everything was beautiful. The walls were conscious, plants, everything was conscious. People moving around, everything is conscious. It's so beautiful. And sometimes I would find the impact of that lasting through the day. So it was built up over time. There's a point where I registered what was happening in this way. But it's like he had been digging every day. So if I would give an analogy, every day one push, one push, one push, one push, until at some point things are happening where the surface mind is registering what is happening. But this thing opening was the psychic experience, the psychic influence coming forward, because the path as if to it was being cut from outside in from that experience, and something of its influence drawn out. And at some point the two link, and poof, this opens. And I remember at one point I asked myself, what is this state like? How does it relate to things? I was exploring the state, and I said, what happens if I think of somebody whom I really dislike? And I said, it is the enemy that I love to hate, but it's still loved. That state was equal to all, including the one that I really love to hate. And so it changed fundamentally many of these relationships. I was still at that point quite incompetent to make full use of it or to fully understand what I had to do about it. I remember one incident, because this would happen, sometimes the influence would stay through the day. I remember one incident, it was in the afternoon. I was going for the afternoon work in the archives. Would have been around, don't know, maybe before 2 o'clock. And I'm cycling. That's one of the cases. I was cycling. And as I'm cycling, there's a little chipmunk that's coming along the road, and I brake, and the chipmunk slows down. I brake again, it slows down again, until eventually, literally, the wheel ran over some part of the tip of the chipmunk, and it was rolling behind in agony. And I'm in shock because I tried to stop myself. The more I stopped, it stopped. It's almost as if it wanted to or couldn't prevent itself from. And I'm watching this, and it's rolling in agony. And as I turn and watch this, a crow has already started flying down from the tree. At the point where this happens, it has already started flying down. It swoops down as I'm going forward. It swoops down, picks up this chipmunk, and flies off. It was almost as if the entire event was orchestrated to the tiniest detail. And to me, it was as if a glimpse of how fate works. And I don't understand still why it had to be like that. What was my role? How could I have even avoided it? I don't know. It was just so perfectly orchestrated. Oh, it was beautiful. The pain, the suffering, all that somehow did not matter because the chipmunk became food for the crow and perhaps its babies and what else, I don't know. But there were glimpses of this kind which would happen quite frequently. And it was quite a remarkable period. It lasted about 1.5 years. One more incident in that state was I was coming out of the house and walking towards the ashram or towards the archives, I don't remember. And as I was coming to the corner of the road, there was a lady coming who was living in Golkond. She was cycling down and she had a mat tied to her at the back of the bicycle with a hook. And in that moment, I knew the mat would fall and there was a boy walking by and he would pick it up and take it away. I just knew before it happened. And as I watched, the mat slipped and fell. Something inside me wanted to tell her, wave at her, and say, hey, that thing fell. But I was so deeply interiorized, I couldn't move, I couldn't change myself. And then that boy walking by looks at the mat, looks at her, hesitates. He wants to tell her the mat has fallen. And she has meanwhile continued. At some point, the hesitation is overridden by, it doesn't matter. The thought that doesn't matter. He walks up, picks up the mat, and then walks away. And I'm seeing it happen. And it was as if I had known it before it would happen, and I'm watching a film unroll that I've already seen. And it's such a beautiful experience. I still do nothing. I cannot do anything because I was so deeply interiorized. I could not change my. I continued walking. I watched her turn, cycle away, and I said, and I was marveling at it all. So there were many such experiences where I realize now what was lacking, that I was deeply interiorized, that I should have made an effort to intervene, to bridge with the surface. I didn't know all this. These were just new experiences, and I was allowing myself to be carried. It came to a point where, and I will describe where it ended. It also completes the discussion of Maya's question, was it because of the surrender? So there was a point where at that time I was eating raw food, both my mother and I, and we were obsessive about it. About 1.5 years down, when this experience is really built up deeply, Panditji told me, Sraddhalu, you don't know what the future will be like. Start eating some of the normal food. And there was a resistance, but I said yes. And then we took the normal food, some idlis, I ate, and then I felt resistance. And they were superficial parts, they were not deeper parts. And I took it, and then I said, no, but I don't want to do this. It was an inertia of the past habit, or the sense of superiority of having done something which was superior food in my understanding, now going to an inferior food. These were all, I will say, formations, belief systems. And something said, I cannot do this, and I want to go back to my raw food. And I made the choice to go back. And at that point, it's as if the full pressure of what was pouring through him stopped. The flow stopped and it subsided. That was the transition, where he was always as loving, he was always this, but this continuous flow had suddenly stopped and subsided. And I'm conscious of that change, of that shift. Much later, of course, I did revert to regular food, but that point of where I withdrew, the force withdrew. It was interesting. And so I'm sharing this in some detail for it, whatever it's worth. And at the very least, it is one of those things which might be of use in the future. But when you're open and then you close, even partially, and the flow stops. And this really goes to that comment earlier about once you're on the path, not to withdraw, because there are consequences. There's a flow. You don't say sorry, and you don't withdraw, you don't pause, you let yourself be carried by the flow. Take the maximum that can happen as far as you can go. But at that point, something happened where a part of me, and I could have easily overridden it if I had a deeper understanding of how these things happened. That's why I'm sharing it, so that perhaps for someone else, one could avoid that mistake. But yes, it's a very different line of experience, quite different from the descent of peace. It's the opening to the psychic presence. And it is only because of this work that he did in me that I experienced the quality of the psychic presence in a way that is so overwhelmingly complete and pure that I could never make the mistake of a mixture. So afterwards, I lost all these things. All these experiences which he gave, I lost at some point after he left his body, a few years down. It took a few years to wear off because I did nothing to sustain them. There were many other experiences which also came during that period, and it was a series of experiences infused directly. And only after losing them, I could understand what it's like to not have them and to be normal. You see, normal human being. And the experience of normality was very disconcerting. And having experienced normality, something within started craving, How do I get back? And I didn't know how to get it back. It's only later, gradually, that it happened. So I think this is good enough for now. Maybe other elements, according to the questions, we can see. So Rajan had another question earlier where he said, could you shed light on that? How could a person follow another in the meditation state? Yes, so this is how I would describe it. A lot depends on who you are and to what extent you have been in your own consciousness. To the extent you are conscious within you in your deeper, inner, higher layers, one tends to become conscious of the equivalent ranges in somebody else. So in Panditji's case, having been in all these deeper layers and ranges of consciousness, he could follow and feel what a person is in their state. I'll share this as an experience of how it works. When you are in a certain state, you feel immediately the resonance in another person when they are in the same state. It's like a tuning fork. You strike here, it resonates with another which is similarly tuned. It's the same analogy, but it's in consciousness terms much more vivid. You feel the familiarity of consciousness, you feel the depth, and then in that, because there's a point as if of identification, you can know quite a bit about it. For example, you can feel whether this is something developed in this life or it's just a part of the personality carried from a prior life, and it's felt in the quality and the way it's formed and settled, or the way it's integrated or not. If it's a lump not integrated with personality, you can say, yes, it comes from prior. Or it has deep roots, but it's like a lump not joined with the rest of the personality. It comes from that deeper range, from prior work done, and so on. So it's really in the quality of consciousness, a lot is carried. But also in a group setting, and I want to share this because it's an interesting dimension to how this works. So let's say in a group setting, you have 5 or 10 people. We are sitting in a circle. Some of these people have certain experiences. If you're in that state, you will feel here, here, and here. These people had experiences. Your eyes closed. You don't know who they are, but you know where they are. You open your eyes and look, who is this person? Who is that person? Who is that person? But you felt it in the location. In the same thing, if it's not 10 people and the circle is now 20 people and quite closely congested, it's difficult to distinguish. You can say, someone there. You open your eyes, there are 3 people in that band, in that, let's say, angle. Which one of them can't make out? So your eyes open, you're much more in the surface consciousness. Eyes closed, you're in the deeper part, and there you sense which one. You can still identify. It takes a little more effort because you have to now tune into the individual. Otherwise, you're tuning into in the physical space. Oh, here, these people had experiences. It's interesting how it works. This resonance is not always in terms of the external form and person of it, but on an inner level, that in a layer that you're feeling that resonance. You can even in that state, for example, sense, oh, here's this person is having this kind of experience. And if you're already in that state, you can as if imprint or infuse or push, nudge or draw somebody who, I don't know who it is, but someone here. So it's as if on a location, you're someone here. And you're able to, if you have already that, you feel this person is struggling to get to a point where you're already, you can as if pull. So it's quite fascinating once one explores this dimension of the nature of transmission of spiritual experience. How we are sometimes unconsciously resonating, sometimes we're conscious, unconsciously we're helping, pulling, pushing, sometimes consciously. And there's quite a degree of influence in a collective that a few individuals can have on others without them knowing anything about it. These individuals may or may not be conscious, depending on how much they choose to feel or how much they are aware of the collective dimension of it. So they could be in an experience which is impacting a few. Neither of them is conscious on the surface. But if the person goes deep enough, he may feel, yes, I know a few people are impacted. I don't know who they are. Where are they? Someone there, or someone of this quality, but I don't know who it is. So it all depends also on the extent of your expansion of consciousness in your container that you're holding. So I give an example of how that works in mother's case. When in France there was a faith healer called Coué, and Coué was teaching people how by repeating certain things, by affirmations, you could cure yourself, heal yourself, things. So when a book came or a description of that, I don't remember it was a book or a newspaper article, some description was there and it was shown to the mother. And she immediately recognized, oh, this is the person, Sri Aurobindo, and I have been working on him to act through him to manifest certain possibilities. But she didn't know the name. He didn't know the name. And they knew the person. You don't have to know a name to know a person, isn't it? It's not the name which defines a person. It's an association. So you can know a person fully with no name at all. And from the description, you could make out, yes, this is the same one. So it's the touch of the consciousness. So a lot happens on this level. And it is the normal work of anybody who is in a deeper or higher state to influence whether it is done consciously or not. But when it is done consciously, it can be done in ways like this, where what can you say? Oh, there are about 3 or 4 people that I was able to influence. Who are they? I don't know. Where are they? I don't know. But this is how they are. What's the use of even such a statement? And in most cases, it doesn't matter. Because it's happening, let it happen. You're doing nothing particularly except being aware of it and perhaps giving a nudge occasionally. So there are many interesting dimensions to this kind of a following or helping. And I would suggest in the example which Rajan has shared, Panditji not only followed him, but also led him and pushed him and even imprinted something in him to fix that experience switch. And I say this with conviction because I experienced that happening in me. So I would sit, this is one of the examples which I will share of the precious time with him. I would come back from the school, and again, as I said, it was always a relief because I was coming from a space of chaos, confusion, stress, heaviness to a place of light, clarity, freedom, joy, love. And I would come to my teacher, and he would be sometimes reading a book, and I would just come quietly. I didn't want to disturb him. I would sit on the bench there and just bathe. And sometimes he would be deep in the reading and I would bathe in the atmosphere and the light. And sometimes he would sense me, so he would put the book down and just sit and smile and just be. And we were both sitting, just being. And there was this transmission of the presence or whatever it was. And I was conscious that he was conscious. I was conscious there was a transmission. I was just enjoying doing nothing, no effort on my part except just remaining like this, open. And then sometimes my mother would come and say, what are you doing? You have so much homework. You have so many things to do. Why are you wasting your time? And I would smile and Panditji would smile, and that was all. Looking back, those were some of the most precious moments. But I was conscious of the work happening. And I give another example. There was somebody, I'll name him Rajit from Bombay, Rajit Bhagwati. And he had some difficulties, including some instability created by a partial Kundalini opening. And Panditji had told him to come to Pondicherry, stay for a few days, and he would help him to get free of that. It was spontaneously a choice he made. So this man would be there for a few weeks, I think. And Panditji's instruction to him was, every day you come and sit there. And Panditji would be doing his work, and he would be sitting there in the hall, doing nothing, just like that, sitting, not talking, not doing anything particular, no mobile phone, no social media in those days, of course. He's just sitting there, and hours. And then after a while, he would meet briefly, and then he would go back. And then again come in the afternoon, sit there, and then go back. And then one day he told this to people. I mean, I'm sitting here, Panditji is doing something inside me. So initially when he said that, I said, oh, it's his imagination. Is it true? But when I had the experience, and now looking back, it was obvious. But he was conscious enough that he could feel that something was being done in him. And what is fascinating is before, a few weeks, months, years down, he was completely healed. He had overcome whatever that distortion had happened in his personality. He was completely free of it. So it is one of those maybe experiences which will be useful to understand how this thing works. So I'm convinced it was not just that Panditji was following him. Maybe Rajan's father had the impression that he just followed him, but he did much more. And he would have helped him to even stabilize and even push him or infuse in him a certain quantum of consciousness which would lead him further in the journey. So this is another interesting thing we can share. When a person is able to do that, not only follow, but also push, the quantity of or quantum of experience you have, it's as if a part of that is supporting this. You can feel in the person a potential, or he's able to go up to there, or he's able to reach that point, but not yet conscious or not yet ready for it, but he will be able to. You can infuse as if a bundle of energy there that says that's a push. That each time he comes to this point, he will be helped and helped over time and made to reach that. So as if the quantum of experience of that realization or that point that you would want the person to get to is infused as a bundle, which remains as a help and as a power to carry him through to that culmination. So this was something actually that Panditji did, and that was one of the ways in which he would help people also. So it doesn't mean you have to be present each time the person meditates. You kind of transmit that packet, the packet stays as long as the person is true to the effort in sincerity and openness and does not disperse or break that packet. That will carry and it will take him through. And you don't need to be constantly active with that person. Yeah, so these are nuances which you can appreciate. If you even feel intuitively, you say, yes, it makes sense. But when you actually experience it, you can say, yes, of course, that's how it works. So a lot of this kind of work was done by Sri Aurobindo and the mother daily. So when mother gave the darshans and the start of the day, she would infuse like this. But also to each person, it was as if a burst of consciousness. That's why I use the word consciousness experience. There's a consciousness and a power of consciousness, but the direction and quantity form of experience also can be infused with that to lead the person to that particular experience or realization. And they would be transmitted in this way to help them. And that's how the sadhana was done so rapidly. When I look back at that period of 1.5 years, I did nothing. And I'm repeating this, I did nothing. And that's how later I could lose it. And then I had to make effort to regain it. But because I had a reference of experience, the regaining was easier. But when I did nothing, when the pressure or the push stopped, naturally it began to subside. And over a few years, because every day, well, it's there. And somewhere suddenly you realize, oh, now it's not the same as it was 6 months ago. And maybe at some point you realize now it's gone. And then you realize certain things you did made it go a bit faster. Some things you did or didn't do allowed it to stay. And that's how you will learn, unfortunately. So in looking back at that period where the mother and Sri Aurobindo were pumping people with this, people didn't realize the value of it. It's only when they lost it that they realized what the value of it was. But at that point, you can make a choice while it's fresh to still regain with a little bit of effort because she's still there to help you. Or you say, oh, it's gone, what do I do? And you go on with your life and do nothing, then you lose it. As a community in the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, we are at that point of transition. From about 3,000 people at the maximum that we were as a community, we are down to nearly just a little over 1,000 people. But how many are still in that effort? And that will make all the difference. And this is extremely important, and I'm placing this on record. It's extremely important. If we make the effort, we can still recover. If we do not, we can continue to fall. As a collective, I'm speaking, as a collective, as a community. Individuals might still be different, but as a community, because this yoga is not just an individual yoga, it is also a collective yoga, and we have to take into account the place of this and the value of this. So we'll move to the next question. Vaijayanti is asking, in today's birthday prayer online session of Panditji, you recited a beautiful prayer. Could you please share the meaning of it? This prayer is called Paramashtakam. And if you have the little booklet called Glory of Glories, I would suggest you take a look in that. There's an English translation there, which begins like this: meditated upon and resorted to by the bearers of the mantra, she creates a naturally beneficent buddhi, intelligent will, whence flows a stream of fulfillness for the wise who make effort with steadfast introspection. I'm sorry, the English is a little very compact. The ideas are very deep and compact because it's translation from Sanskrit. But the text starts like this, and I have just got the text converted with OCR in a text form. I will try to put it on the website of integralstudies.in. There's a separate WordPress website as a post, and I will link to it in today's talk. Right now, I don't have it ready as a post. Maybe by tomorrow or day after. Give me 2 days, and I'll put the link there with the full translation of the text. So for those who are watching after 2 days or those who are watching now, just check back after 2 days. So there you'll have the full translation. But if you have the little booklet, a small thing this size, you'll find this translation there. Arnab is asking, I had a question for the special occasion of Panditji's birthday. I read in one of the books that Panditji discovered Savitri through the Sanskrit version that was started by Kapali Shastriyar, but unfortunately couldn't be completed. If you could share some light on it, any more details that Panditji shared about his experiences or any anecdotes worth sharing with us? Yes, there are several things around that incident. So Sri Aurobindo at that point had already been writing Savitri, and in selections, certain cantos were being distributed and circulated in the ashram community while Sri Aurobindo was still revising. Kapali Shastriyar at that point began the translation into Sanskrit. And each translation was sent to Sri Aurobindo for approval. Sri Aurobindo made corrections sometimes and sent back. So what we have in the Sanskrit translation is the most authentic you could have, because it's as if first of all, Kapali Shastriyar is a master Sanskrit scholar and a master in English. You need mastery of both languages to do a really good translation. And this is far better than any AI can ever do. And with the mastery, when he writes, and it goes to Sri Aurobindo, who is the original writer, composer of Savitri, who corrects it with his mastery of Sanskrit. So you have the most authentic ever translation in Sanskrit language of Savitri, which is available because of that. And as a result, he did not complete it because from the point Sri Aurobindo was no more available, well, you didn't have the same authenticity of the master's correction, so it could not be taken further. Nevertheless, as a part of this process, because the Sanskrit sometimes was so off from the English that one had to review what was the text in English, that Sri Aurobindo discovered mistakes that had been inserted by the writer. So it could be sometimes that he was dictating and Nirodharan wrote, or it goes to the press and there's a mistake in the transmission there. So one such example which Panditji narrates, postal routes. So it was typed postal routes with ROOTS, as if like tree roots. So you have to break your head. You don't understand, but it's mystic poetry, something which is beyond my comprehension. So you make the translation, make it fit, and send it to Sri Aurobindo. And he says, what's this? Doesn't make sense. You look at the English and it should have been ROUTES, the route, the path, the road, postal routes. And so it was obviously a mistake in the transcription. So there were such mistakes which were found in the English because of this. Otherwise, you see, Nirodharan would read back to Sri Aurobindo, postal routes, it sounded right. Sri Aurobindo says, okay. Except the spelling was wrong. It was a different route. And it was because of the Sanskrit translation that this was found. And there were a few such which were found in this way. But what Panditji found was, in the Sanskrit, the deeper sense of those words was more evident. And you'll understand why, those of you who followed our exploration of the Sanskrit language. In the Sanskrit language, the etymology is so close to the word power and meaning that in the very formulation, you can feel the touch of what that experience is, which is not so easy in the English language. So when the translation is done with the mastery of both the translator and the author involved, the power that was there in Sanskrit language was exceptional. And the nature of the experience could be comprehended more completely because of the natural character of Sanskrit language where, based on root sounds, it's like a spread of an intuitive experience. Whereas in the English language, that is reduced to a mental idea. So the experience is narrowed down into an idea angle, an idea fragment of that intuitive experience, which is multifaceted. And so from that idea fragment, as you read, you have to kind of reconstruct the underlying experience. Whereas the Sanskrit is expressing the underlying experience. Why didn't Sri Aurobindo write in Sanskrit? Well, that was the work he had to do in the English language to transmit to the world in the accessible language of the age. But for which purpose he had literally to lift the English language as high as it could be lifted to the Sanskrit capability. Now, this we have to understand, lifting the language itself, what that means. And we see in history of the English language, the first such lifting is done by Shakespeare, which is why he's still celebrated today as literally defining the modern English and its capacity to express higher ideas or more complex and rich experiences. But that's as far as it could be taken in the mental domain. Sri Aurobindo takes it into an intuitive domain. And at that point, you see the formal structure of language needs to become more supple. You need to break away from the limitation which would come from the need for rhyming while still keeping the power of rhythm. So Sri Aurobindo deliberately writes Savitri without the rhyme, because in Sanskrit, rhymes are far easier. English, because being so rigid structurally and narrow in idea form, you might get good rhymes occasionally, but you can't get the idea you want to express with the rhyme necessary. So he frees himself as far as possible from the limitations of the linguistic character. He keeps the rhythm because you need the rhythm for the transmission of the power and the force behind. And then he composes Savitri in this way. And then occasionally you have the overrides of even the rhythms where necessary, where there's no other way. The language itself is incapable of taking certain words. The words don't exist and you can't coin them beyond a point. So still, with all that, he lifts as far as it can go. But how far can it go? Well, there's a limit. Sanskrit can go much more. So when it's translated into Sanskrit by these masters of the language and by the author's spiritual and even the translator's spiritual dimension, it's able to be taken to that which actually was the more powerful transmission of content that Sri Aurobindo intended, which was limited by the language limitation itself. So that's why Pandit Ji comments that through Savitri, he could understand the full sense of, through Sanskrit translation, he could understand the full sense of Savitri much more. So I think that's good enough for Arnab's question. We go to Salil. Here's a question. A very happy birthday to all. Will you please say something about wideness in various parts of the being? I had heard a couple of stories of Panditji. So first, he would sense that a tap at the back of the house is dripping while physically much away, a couple of rooms, I guess, and would know to close it. Is this wideness in the subtle physical or a developing inner sense of hearing? 2, someone had narrated how at the airport they had gone to receive Panditji. Just before he came to the arrival gate, there was a smell of flowers, jasmine perhaps. This would be at a distance of about 20 meters. Is this a result of purity and wideness in the vital being? And then Salil completes, just as narrowness and rigidity go together, wideness and plasticity go together, it is also related to developing individuality and at the same time plasticity in us. So yes, to some extent, wideness and plasticity would tend to go together, but not necessarily. They are fundamentally different things. So you could have wideness without enough plasticity, or you could have a lot of plasticity without enough wideness. But developing one would require as if some development of the other, but not necessarily entirely. So yes, there is a consciousness which is wider. It can happen on many levels. Yes, it can be subtle physical, it can be some part of the vital, it can be part of the vital leaning to the physical, it can be in the mental, which is much more easy, it can be part of the mental leaning to the vital and the physical. So a lot depends on the case. It could be underlying all this a wideness which comes from the experience of the self itself, which would be the most true and most complete. Which one was it in these cases? I don't know, so perhaps I can speculate. In this case, I have seen Panditji in the bed, at one extreme of the house, and the tap is on the other extreme of the house. The gap in between would be, as the crow flies, straight line through multiple rooms, at least 5 or 6 walls, and might be in about 50 meters, perhaps. And suddenly he gets up, walks all the way through several rooms, all the way across. It's is to go 90 degrees. It's not a diagonal path. Goes, switches off the tap, comes back, and lies down again. And it had just reached the brink. Interesting. So you could say perhaps he was aware that it was already flowing and something within him pops up, which could happen from purely intuitive perception. It could be that he's at that point, as he's sliding into sleep, his consciousness widens out and he senses something, goes and corrects it. It could be that it's always wide and it's not, that it's just happening as he's sliding into sleep and he's conscious of what's happening. So many possibilities exist. I don't know. I will not speculate. I would rather use this occasion to show you the variations of what could be. In the case where it could be just an intuition, you don't need to be in a widened state. But you must have a part of the intention that holds that space within you. So you will not know what's happening in the next house, although it's 1 meter behind the wall, because that house is not in your consciousness. So it's not as if you're putting out an extension in physical or vital terms. It's in the mind, let's say, a zone that you consider your space for which you're responsible, and that's enough to bring it within the ambit of the intuition revealing to you. You could then say what's happening in the other house and extend it, and you could perhaps catch that. So that may be the basic thing. It could be that beyond that, something of the vital consciousness now extends and fills that and can pick up, and especially in a domain close to the physical, it can pick up many things. Now, I personally am of the opinion that he actually felt, because I've seen other things happening where he was conscious of, which he could not have known any other way. With a tap, at least one might say, oh, maybe he opened it, or while passing by after his lunch, he saw that it was flowing. But I know cases where he didn't. I know cases where at a great distance even he had awareness of something. Sometimes he would ask somebody when they were traveling, let me know when you're traveling, let me know what is the itinerary, when you will leave, etc. And the intention always was to put a certain intention of protection and to connect to the mother. So in those days, it would take that form literally, that they would go and inform the mother, so and so is coming by such and such a flight. And we are assuming that at that point, the mother is putting a certain protection. But that continued for him, although he would not have to go physically to the mother, he would connect it, invoke, or hold the person in the consciousness, in mother's consciousness. So there were things like that which would be done, and it is done intentionally. There's no other reason. He would never show off or say anything about it. He would just do it quietly. And so I'm aware that there were things like this. And there was one incident which I have shared before, where a certain group from Chennai, Madras, had phoned at that time, and it was still Madras. They phoned up to him and saying, we want to come and meet you on Sunday morning. He said, no, it's not Sunday morning. You can come in the afternoon. Morning, I'm busy. They said, no, we have to come. We will come. So he puts down the phone, and with some vehemence, he says, but I don't want them to come in the morning. And they didn't come. A phone call comes afterwards. Their car broke down on the way. And so they came in the afternoon finally. And when that message came, I was present. I saw in him the reaction. And he shook his head and said, I have to be more careful. Because that vehemence that he put, I don't want them to come, was enough as a push that it could, I won't say it will cause, but it would be the trigger to prevent them in some way to come. And then it catches causes and perhaps triggers it. I don't know. That detail is not important. But the vehemence with which he said that was enough to trigger a chain of circumstances. And he was conscious, and he did subsequently make sure that it would not recur in that way. But there's another example of the same vehemence, and this was a businessman in Delhi. At some point, that man was phoning him every day, just for like that, as a way of connecting to receive help. Nothing particular, and sometimes it was just pointless interaction, superficially. So once he tells Panditji that, oh, I have these boils which are formed on my body. Panditji said, oh, second day, boils, what has happened? Oh, it's still there. Hmm. Third day, again the man says, and Panditji said with vehemence, he said, this should stop now. Something like that, words to that effect. Puts down the phone, the next day all of them have gone, just like that. And the businessman would tell me many times afterwards, he did this, he did this. But just to show you that the influence, perception and influence are also related. When you perceive at a distance, it's a point of contact. When there's a point of contact, there's also a point of influence, whether you choose to exercise it or not. So always the two are related. In this case, he was conscious, and wherever required, there were interventions. Sometimes they were spontaneous, sometimes, meaning spontaneous being he didn't intend to, but just the fact that he's holding someone or something in his consciousness, there's an influence because he's in that consciousness. If he's not, perhaps it doesn't matter. But when he is, it does matter. And so there are sometimes spontaneous interventions, spontaneous influences, and then sometimes intended, where you saw the force of the vehemence, and then it has this dramatic effect. So I think I've tried to broaden the question to something more general so we understand, and not just what that example did, but also the broader scope of how this works. Ketaki has sent an interesting comment. In last Saturday session, you announced Panditji's birth anniversary. I thought of sharing with you the page I created in Marathi on Wikipedia. It is my humble offering to the mother. So would you please go through it and give suggestions? So I will thank you very much. I just had a quick look at the page. It's the list of books and a little biographical of Panditji. It's in Marathi on Wikipedia. So mr.wikipedia.org/s/7g55. But maybe you can just search MP Pandit or Madhav Pandit in Marathi. You'll find the page. So we'll thank Ketaki for this. Neeraj has a few questions. I had some questions about MP Pandit. What was his relation with mother like? I'll just go one by one and answer each. I think you'll find best his relation with the mother described in his own words, in his own experiences, in some of his books, and particularly from which we have drawn his messages which we share on the birthdays, including today's message, which you will see on the video, which was a webcast earlier also. Or look at the previous videos. Each one we have also put at the end the message cards. And there you see it was a total surrender. It was a total dedication in recognition of the Divine Mother's incarnation. And his whole life was given to her, and there's nothing beyond that. Totally. There's an incident. I don't remember the specifics of where and how, but where one of the astrologers, somebody who was in astrology, looking at his chart, said, your life will be dominated by a woman. And Panditji smiled and said, yes, it is the mother. So, but yes, that was the case. And everything in him, entirely, down to the physical body. And you could feel it in his physical. And I would dare say this even without hesitation, down to the cells. He had that total commitment to the mother. You could feel that even in the tissue of his body. And that's something which I have felt consciously in the contact. So that was the level of his commitment and dedication. So the second question Neeraj has, what did he think of books like The Mother and The Mother's Agenda? So The Mother, of course, is Sri Aurobindo's writing. In the agenda, which is the mother's descriptions of her own experiences transcribed, there was some problem initially, because the formal position taken by the ashram trust at that point was that the agenda was printed, published, without the formal process that the mother had indicated. She had told Satprem that it should be edited by Andre to remove personal comments, because mother in passing made comments about people, sometimes criticizing them, and she had wanted Andre to personally edit. And when Satprem first published, he did not follow that, and he published without that editing. And the first edition, for the first volume he published, was of the last conversations, where there is this great clash that he has with other attendants, with the mother, and intended to put those people in bad light. So I think it was a decision taken by Nalini that it would not be sold in the ashram. At that time, Nolinida was one of the trustees. I will put on record something which I don't fully agree with, but I will still put it on record. This was narrated to me by Nolinida's personal assistant, who was Animadi. And she said this to me in so many words. She said, when the first volume of, which was the last volume of the agenda series, because Satprem published the last sessions first to discredit these ashramites, when that was first brought out, and the first copy of that was handed over to Nolinida was given to him, Animadi told me, he held it in his hand, literally with his fingertips, and then he put it away quickly and saying, there's a lot of falsehood in this. He felt falsehood. Now, remember, these are mother's words. And at best, you have Satprem's comments occasionally added to that. But if you ignore the comments, it's mother's agenda. If he felt falsehood, it would be in the intention of that publication, which was intended to misrepresent or harm reputation of some people, whatever it is. So, but on the basis of that, a decision was taken by the trust not to allow the agenda to be sold, published, or distributed in the ashram. So it was technically banned. And Panditji at that point, I remember, he was not happy with that, but he followed it, being within the framework of the system. Subsequently, because the books were not available, you didn't have the internet, you could not get things easily. Subsequently, somebody got him the books and gave them to him. And he began to read them. And that's when he said, this is so valuable. And he said, if we had known that mother was going through all this, we would not have bothered us with all these petty organizational issues. He was conscious that nobody knew really what she was going through. And even if she had given a hint, it would have been enough that they would not have troubled her. But it was also, she wanted to be managing the things. So. And then he said, well, since it is not permitted in the ashram, the crucial elements, because there's a lot of things mother shares in passing, which are perhaps passing comments, but there are also deep insights. He said those crucial elements of insights, he took those as themes and wrote entire articles on each of them. And this became the basis for 4 volumes of what is printed as commentaries on the mother's ministry. And at the end of completing that, he said, everything that I found in the agenda which should be of value in the sadhana, I have put in this with the full context of each of those principles fully elaborated. So even if someone doesn't read the agenda or is not allowed to, you will find the content of that as relevant for you available in this. And that was his intention in those writings. So those volumes are very precious. You will find them online. One of those volumes is out of print, but we will get it in print. But this was the background of how he dealt with that. And one of the things which happened, because it was the English edition of the agenda, mother had used a particular word, supramental being, and then the intermediate race. And in French, she used the word sur-homme. Sur means above man, and the supramental, homme supramental or supramental being. And she made the distinction and what this is and what that is as an intermediate step. This in the English edition of the agenda had been translated as Superman versus supramental being. So Panditji used that vocabulary of Superman as the intermediate and the supramental being. And he wrote an article about this, the distinction made. So whatever he did, and this was published in the ashrams in the Advent, which Panditji was editing. And some of these articles came there also. And I remember at that time, some of the scholars, this included 3 names, and I will not name them, unfortunately, but one of them is still alive, 2 of them have passed on, but they were, so to say, they considered themselves great scholars. One of them was genuinely a great scholar, but the other 2 were, let's say, kids in comparison. They all ganged up and they said, what is this he's talking? This is all nonsense. They had not read, obviously, mother's comments. And so I remember they had this meeting. I was present in one of those meetings. This was one of the very strange things. So one of them was actually a teacher in the school. I'd be sitting in the school, in the class of that teacher, and he would deliberately making these comments. While he is supposed to take our class, he would be talking to his friends and making these ridiculing comments against Panditji, hoping that I would get distressed. And it's very petty, but I kept quiet. But I saw how it worked. And they decided there that they would confront Panditji. And then one of them went to Panditji and said, "We have read this article and we disagree." And Panditji said, "All right, whatever your disagreement, you write your article, I'll publish in the Advent." That's all. He didn't bother to get into this kind of talk because he knew what it was, what the mother was saying. Much later, I think it was George von Wreckham who said, "Hey, this is a bad translation. Surom should be translated as overman." And that's how he coined the term overman as a translation in English of Surom. And that became the overman as the intermediate race. And now you have many people using that term easily. But at that time in the agenda, it was Superman. So Panditji had used that word because he had not read it in the French, he had read it in the English. But the distinction was what is important, and he had articulated this. So there were many things like this where Panditji took what the mother was describing and developed that theme, elaborated upon it, made it relevant also in the context of the sadhana, which mother might not have done while talking to Satprem casually in passing. You see, so those writings of Panditji are very valuable and they carry a lot of the essence of the agenda. Personally, he never thought that there was any need to ban the agenda. And I think to this day, the trust board still keeps it in that state. Nobody talks about it, but it's just not sold in the ashram. But I think we need to forget all those things and move on. It's finally mother's agenda and we need to publish it. The rest is now a question of copyright and legalities. I don't know and I'm not concerned with. So the only thing Panditji used to tell people who wanted to read, don't believe Satprem's critical comments against the Ashramites, because he had an agenda there. Everything else is totally loyal to the mother, there's no problem. But occasionally he will make these comments. You see, these people, they were nasty and etc. It didn't work like that. He had his own issues, let's say. There's one example I will share. Mother tells Satprem at one point, "There are 4 people in the ashram whose anger hurts me physically." She's trying to make him conscious that this is happening. He uses that to show, see how nasty those people are. It turns out, and I heard this from somebody else, to whom she named the 4, and one of them was Satprem himself. She was trying to tell him indirectly, now rather than saying, "Hey, look, your anger is hurting me physically, don't get into these violent angers." He had serious issues with anger, depression, suicidal tendencies, etc. And she was helping him to navigate that. But rather than saying it directly where she knew it would perhaps trigger another round of depression and suicidal tendency. If she said, "Hey, your anger is hurting me," she'll say, "Oh, I'm going to go and commit suicide." So she had to manage him, and very skillfully she was managing him. But this is just an example I'm giving how when Satprem left the ashram, he was angry, perhaps with good reason. I'm not concerned with that. The point, though, was in his anger, he tried to make comments where he wanted to misrepresent others. Or even he had this theory that the mother was, when she left her body, her body should not have been touched, etc. And so he made a whole thing around it, which is not correct, which is not true at all. Everybody knew the mother's instructions. He didn't know that others knew. I'm not going to the detail of that controversy. The point being, ignore that. And Panditji's advice was ignore his comments, personal comments about people. Stay with mother's words and that interaction, and there's no problem there. So I think that should answer the question. Neeraj's third question, did he do physical exercise? Yes, he did. Although he did not go to the playground, mother wanted him very much to go to the playground. He did not, and later he regretted. And he understood it had many reasons. One was physical, the other was also spiritual. And there was a third reason, which was also administrative. A lot of people who were against him in the administrative framework of the ashram, and he was the butt end of a lot of scheming and manipulation by certain groups. At that, mother would have been able to neutralize had he gone to the playground. So there were several reasons for that. But on the physical side, he was conscious of this. And later in life, he was doing certain exercises daily. And everything he did was always rigorous to the T, to the detail in the routine of the day. And twice a day, he would do exercises, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. And there were different exercises, whatever he found useful. And fourth question, Neeraj asked, did he have a meditation practice? Yes, again, that was a routine. 3 of them at least were formal structured. So morning he would have a meditation which would be alone. Then we had the morning prayer where he would recite things, where later he had me join and recite with him many things which we recited and which he taught. And then in the evening was the formal meditation, which would be initially 6:30 to 7. It sometimes would be a talk followed by a meditation, but he had every day something. And then later he changed the time 7 to 7:30. So for those sessions which he had informed the mother, and mother told him to tell him the time exactly, and she said, I will be present. So he was very particular. Exactly at that time, there would be the meditation. And I think it was half an hour talk followed by half an hour meditation. Don't remember how it was originally. Later, it changed several times. But he informed the mother on an inner level when the timings were changed. As it is today, it was 7 to 7:30, the meditation, the last that we were following as a routine. And always because it was with this, the mother was present. So we try to keep that routine still. Morning prayer, I lost the routine I kept it for a long time, for many decades. And at some point I lost it because of heavy travel. But I try to resume that whenever possible. But interestingly, after that, from the point where I said I had finished the ashram school and I was in that mood where he was infusing something, the experiences, after this meditation that we would have, there would be half an hour of sitting. Sometimes we would chat. And then he would take me at 8 o'clock every day to meditate in the ashram. So morning I would go with him to the office. And then again 8 o'clock in the evening after the meditation at home, he would take me 8 to 8:30 and he would sit there in the meditation hall. I would sit behind him. I remember at that point, of course, it made a difference. I remember at that point one day there's one lady, weird lady. She was a little mentally unstable. One day she comes to me and says, don't sit behind Panditji every day. I said, why? His shadow will fall on you. I said, I'm happy with that. Thank you for your advice. And I walked away. But it's one of those silly things from silly people. But I was conscious that he intended it and there was a certain purpose and he put me in that routine. I followed that again for many decades after, but eventually many of these things changed for me. But yes, he had. And everything he did, whether physical exercise, food, meditation, was bang on time, always on time, and down to the minute, sometimes down to the second. How he did it is still to me amazing, but he would always be able to do it. Okay. So I'm going to look at the chat box if there are any questions from here so that it's not just from the emails. Those of you who want to send things on email, please remember the email that we are using for communications of questions is integralstudies.in@gmail.com. And you can always send questions on that. There are a couple of other questions, but I think we have broadly covered. I'll just see what is in the chat box. Srinivas is saying, I saw Panditji in 1985 at the Indian Institute of World Culture, Bangalore. I don't remember the subject he spoke on, but his presence was overwhelming. It's a very interesting observation. You see, in that interaction, you don't remember what he spoke of. Somehow that didn't matter. What came through was the presence. And it's the question I would ask. What if you remembered even what he spoke of, but there was nothing of the presence? Which would be more valuable? It's interesting, a question to observe. And if the presence was transmitted and you still feel it and you have put capital P in the presence, you can close your eyes and as if tune in and feel that presence again or something of the touch of it. And then if you catch that, then you can tune in and go deeper into it and you will get it back. It's never left you. Words can leave you. Ideas can leave you, but the touch of the presence and the spiritual presence in this case, not vital presence, that stays. It impacts, it changes you. And that's why he still remembers 1985. That's a long time, isn't it? So it's now 40 years almost. 40 years. And still you remember the presence. Pradyut Kumar says, I had met Panditji thrice, of which once at his residence and the rest in the ashram building. To me, he was a channel for Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's light and force, which I received through him. And SRJMD says, when reading Panditji's book on yoga of knowledge, I wasn't able to put it down, written with such clarity, got a lot from it. Yes. Mhm. Yes, and many other comments, but I'm looking for if there's any particular question which. Huh. So Jessica is asking this. It's against the law to pray in schools in the USA, and Americans think gurus are cult leaders. I really dislike that point of view. Prayer is very powerful, and someone able to share and teach that is precious. Yeah, this is a bit of a complexity, unfortunately, in the United States, and it works both ways. By formal removal of prayer in the schools, they got free from what was at that point the Judeo Christian structure and the programming that goes with it. On the other hand, the removal of prayer itself is a great loss because of its spiritual value. So, how could you separate the course religious form and content from the spiritual content? If you could do that, one could easily bring back the value of prayer without the other accompanying elements that might come with it. And some of the elements could be a lot of the fear of God and all the concepts of God which create revulsion even in the child. So I see rather these things as attempts at a very crude, superficial level to catch one truth or protect one truth at the expense of another and lose something in the process. So often you feel this oscillation. One group insists prayer is important, one group insists that it should not be brought. Each is catching an aspect of the truth. But if they could go to the essential truth that prayer is a spiritual principle without the religious content, then the two could actually come together and there would be no problem. And this is the problem with a lot of the, I will use the word generally, in a general way, spiritual education. To bring back some element of spiritual education in our children, in our lives, in the collective life of humanity is absolutely essential because we're spiritual beings on a spiritual path. You can't knock that out and say education will have nothing to do with spirituality. But how do you separate the coarser elements of religious content from the spiritual? If this can be resolved, then we should have no problem. As long as these two are identified, we have a lot of problems. And in the way forward, I would say India can show the way because the what goes under the title of the Hindu tradition, more truly the Sanatana Dharma, is the only tradition in which this distinction is clearly made. We understand what is religious content, we understand what is spiritual, essential, free from the religious content, and we can manage the two separately. So if this principle can be brought forward, and it has to be done in India first, if it can be correctly done in India, it'll be easy to replicate in the world. Or perhaps in little spaces in the world, little groups and pockets, it can be done correctly. So just as a comment. Mhm. Jessica says, and the chipmunk lives on through the crow. The chipmunk transformed into the muscle and feathers and lived on in another form. Same with us if we eat plants and animals, they transform and we dance and pray together. Yes, it's a beautiful way of looking at it. In fact, that was the nature of the experience. While on one part I was hurt by the way it happened for the suffering of the chipmunk, it was fascinating to see it was suffering momentary and immediately became food for the other, and it was gone. The suffering was superficial. And because I was deeply in the psychic state, the whole thing was like a dance of nature. And there were many such experiences which would happen, quite fascinating, spontaneously. Uh, Anupam asks, is it true that what has been given can be withdrawn totally because you once said it is there, you're not just conscious because of old or past habits are coming again and take their place? Please explain. I did quite catch the question, but what has been given can be withdrawn totally. I'm not sure if I get the point, but if the point was that a spiritual gift given, whether it can be withdrawn. It can be, but normally it would not be. It would be rather the person who rejects or closes himself to it. That's more often the case. In the nature of this divine grace, which is the nature of the spiritual consciousness, You are always given more than you are worthy of. It's a question we could ask. Are we worthy of the grace? And always the answer would be no. But precisely the grace is grace because it is not in relation to our worth. It is always more than our worth. That's why we call it grace. We are always given more than our worth. But because our worth is limited, can we contain what is given? Most often not. We tend to lose quite a large part or spill or not use or sometimes even misuse. Always. Because the grace gives more than you are worthy of. Always there is some wastage, some loss, or even some misuse. But that's the nature of humanity. And if it were not for the grace, we would never have any hope of growing. If you were given exactly what you're worthy of, how would you ever go beyond what you are worthy of? Precisely because you're given much more that you're pushed, taken to more, and then that's how you open, isn't it? So rather rely on the grace, call upon the grace, despite your unworthiness. Do not measure in terms of your worth or non-worth. If at that point you can, irrespective of your worth, open yourself with love, give yourself with love, then she will make you worthy. She will make you capable of what she is able to give you, isn't it? That should be our intention. Interesting. Suraj says, when I see Panditji's image or imagine him, my external senses go within myself. It's a very interesting observation. You find that happening when the person is in a particular state of consciousness and you look. If you're sensitive, you tend to be drawn into the same state. It's quite fascinating. And this is why the mother gave so much value to certain photographs of hers. Certain photographs she named specifically for a particular quality or a power that was transmitted. Certain photos of a certain period, she said, they represented more of this aspect or that, and so on. There was one particular photo that she gave to Duman and said, this must be placed in the dining room because it was her aspect as Annapurna, the fullness of, I'm going to generalize the word Anna from just food to the bountifulness, the, what's the word in English? Plenitude, bounty. There's another word which slips my mind, but this sense of fullness that pours out. And of course, in the nature of the food, Anna is not only food, it is matter, but it is also this fullness that comes with the food, where one grain becomes 100 grains as it grows. So that kind of a multiplier effect. And it is that aspect of the consciousness which she represents in that photo. So that was placed in the dining room, in the room where the food is served. So there were things like this. And that is the importance of the photograph and the state of consciousness. That's why when it relates to spiritual people and states of the spiritual immersion, the photo has tremendous value, can have tremendous value in this way. Precisely draws you into the state which corresponds to that. So when you find your external senses going within, catch that movement and see where it takes you. Go as deep as it takes you. And you might just be helped in that experience. Vivek says, you are so blessed to have grown up in the ashram and in Panditji's house, and so are all the ashramites who grew in the mother's care. Yes, we were all blessed. Did we make the most of it? No. So that's the nature of the grace, as I said. But you too are blessed. Are you making the most of what you are given? And that's the question we have to introspect. Certainly, being in such a space as the physical space of the ashram, and in this case also in addition with Panditji, you have a huge, huge pressure of the force. It goes two ways. If you're open, you are tremendously helped. If you are not ready and you resist, it becomes also a burden and a suffocation because you don't want it. It demands for you to grow. It pushes you to grow. And if you don't want it, if you oppose, if you're not ready, then it can have a counter effect also. And in many cases, as you see also in the history of the ashram, the mother had to reduce the intensity of the pressure to match the lack of competence of a group. So when the large number of children and devotees who were not sadhakas came as refugees, at the end of the Second World War, she had to reduce the intensity of the presence. Certain rules were put in place. Children below a certain age could not approach the samadhi, etc. Or when they were taken to the mother would consciously dim the intensity of the power around her to be able to make it accessible or bearable to the children who were brought to her. And so there was this dynamic shift of the intensity of her power. And so if you generalize it on a collective space and allow dilution now, as you see today with all these shops and eateries coming near the ashram, crowding around to cater to the tourists who come to further dilute, the loss is enormous. And I would even generalize this question or modify it slightly to say, we were blessed to have grown up at a time when the presence and the power was intense. Now there's a huge dilution. It is still there, but there's huge dilution compared to what was. And if you project it in the future, it'll go on diluting. We have to make the effort to counter that, neutralize that, and rebuild the intensity. And this is where I'm saying, are we really doing what we need to? If those who are alive today were there at the time when the power was strong, the presence was strong, is it not their responsibility to ensure that for the future we rebuild it back to what it was, or at least remove the dilutions, that it can bounce back to what it should be, or what she would fill to build it? Shouldn't it be our responsibility? Are we making the effort for that? And I don't see that effort happening again, I'm speaking of the collective consciousness, in the collective community. And the fact that the effort is not being made shows you the unworthiness at a collective level. There are individuals, they may say, I'm helpless. That's a different story. But at a collective level, we have failed her. We are not living up to what the minimum we could do is to protect what she's pouring into us, isn't it? And for her, then it's like, okay, you don't want, fine, or you don't make use of it. She will dim it to the level that is bearable or where it is not misused. And certainly allowing large numbers of tourists to dilute will lead to misuse of the force, and therefore the force will withdraw, will reduce, etc. So I'm sorry I've taken the question as a point of generalization to something, but you must recognize the value of this. So now coming to you individually, what do you do about it? Where is the mother today? Right here, right now, deep within you, above you, around you. Open yourself to her and she pours in you. What do you do with it? That's the question we all have to ask. Because at a certain point, the dilution in the ashram might become so bad as to be equal to elsewhere. I don't think it will ever be, but still, it can be close enough that you could say, well, you're here or there, you still have to make the same effort in terms of what you choose to do with what comes to you. So we have been blessed. It is certainly a great blessing. It is certainly a gift to have experienced that and then to experience the dilution and to know the difference. But now we must do what is right. Otherwise, we would have betrayed her, isn't it? So Vivek asks, Mahalakshmi asks, has Panditji written books in Kannada? There are translations for sure. You will find many books have been translated and in many languages. At least some of the key books have been translated. SU asks, what is Panditji's action in the world after he withdrew physically? He's still very active. I'll share an interesting experience. This was from a friend in Chennai. I think he's a doctor. So he narrated how he had some medical problem. And during the state in which he was undergoing surgery, if I don't recall details, as he was undergoing surgery, he saw this person, spectacled person with a green light going inside his body and moving around, navigating and correcting things. And then afterwards, after he had been healed, he saw Panditji's photo and said, hey, that's the person that was working inside. Interesting. So he didn't know who it was before. Why did he do in that? There must have been some past connection, obviously. Otherwise, one would not have such an experience. But yes, it is a fact. And it was the mother who told Panditji that Kapali Shastri had taken a station in the higher mind from where he was helping. And Panditji would take an equivalent station from which he found that he would be able to help and participate. And this is the case for many of those who were part of, let's say, mother's physical army in the work, in the manifestation. And until the point where they choose to reincarnate, they will continue to work for her, with her, from those domains. Bhumika is asking about significance of mother's other photographs. I think the best would be for you to actually see the ones which mother has named. Start with those. But more than that, it's not the name that matters. It's what you receive from it that matters. So rather than fixating on a particular name, even if mother gave a name, what does that name mean? What is Annapurna? Think about it. If you reduce it to just a mental idea, it's just this. But if you understand what it is in experience, what she is as Annapurna, it's a whole multidimensional experience. And a word is at best a label. It's not even a descriptor of what that is. So the words are insufficient. I would recommend that you ignore the names or where you find them helpful, use them, but go to the photograph and just feel what comes through the photo. This morning we had an ongoing slideshow of Panditji's photographs. We had more than 1,000. And among them, there were some photos of the mother, which were also scanned, and they were part of that from his album. And there were some very beautiful darshan photos, which I don't find even available today. And each of those, you're seeing a certain aspect of the mother, and you just let that carry you, let that fill you. Don't try to give to it a mental form or word. Just feel and let it fill you. And it may happen that certain forms, certain aspects, certain photos resonate with you particularly intensely or deeply. Use those as starting points, and later it may change because the different aspects might assist you, or the same aspect might widen, deepen to lead you to something more. So to me, rather I would say don't worry about the names, let the presence carry. And what you will discover at some point is whatever that aspect the photo represents, behind that is the fullness of her. So it's like this. You look at a person, you look at the right hand, you can see the hand is just the hand, but it's the whole person working through the hand, isn't it? So the aspect is the whole working through an aspect. And at some point you experience the whole. And it really doesn't matter which one. You enjoy the aspects for what they bring, but you always meet the whole through the aspect. So these are experiences you might have if you let that develop. So Brooke is saying, I think the world is in such a state that if the force was around today in a living being, it would be dimmed. Why would mother reduce the force? What would happen if she didn't reduce the force? So it depends on the condition. If she's meeting a child, the force is too intense for the child to bear. And she made this comment, the brain is still in developing condition. If the force is too powerful, it may affect that at a physical level. It may overwhelm. So what would happen to the child? He may suddenly feel himself numbed. He may feel himself overwhelmed. He may start crying, whatever form it may take. But always you reduce to what the person is currently capable of. Match that capacity. And then if you feel there's a potential, you may nudge to a little more than the capacity in the direction of the potential. That's generally how it works. That's why you need to dim it. You take an individual, for example. Let me give an example, a real example of how that worked with somebody. I'd gone to a community, a spiritual community in the US. And on my arrival, there was somebody waiting to meet me for dinner. He introduced himself as so-and-so filmmaker. And he said, I visited the ashram. I had met the mother when Aurobindo started. I said, oh, wonderful. And then he started telling me what happened. He said, I was in Aurobindo. I had gone for the superficial external reasons of eco-village type thing. And then somebody there said, go and meet the mother. He said, why should I meet this 90-year-old woman? Just go. You'll feel something. So he says, okay. So he said, I went to the mother expecting nothing. He said, when he went before her, suddenly he found these huge waves of love pouring into him. And as he starts narrating, his tears start flowing. And he said, she bounced me all around the universe. And I said, please explain what you're describing. She said, I was bounced around all over the universe, and then it was as if layers and layers were unveiling, and this incredible love was pouring and pouring, and layers unveiling. And then he says, I don't know what happened after that. For 3 days, I was in a daze. He said, I don't know how I ate food. I don't know what I did. I don't know how I did. I was just in a daze. And after 3 days, the whole experience slowly dimmed. So imagine at that point he has put on his clothes, obviously. He has eaten food, he has done all his shower and whatever else. He has no idea of what he has done and how he has done it. That's the level of overwhelming. Why? Because he's been pulled into this deeper and higher state of consciousness. The outer person is like almost like a automaton doing its thing while he's in this overwhelming condition. 3 days, and then eventually dims. He comes back to his so-called normal person, except he's no more normal. He's changed after this. He's no more the same person. So he comes to my teacher, MP Pandit, and he says, after this experience, I don't know what to do with my life. I can't live in the ashram because the restrictions are too many. I can't live in Auroville because I have my own thing. What do I do with my life? I don't know what to do. So Panditji took the question to the mother. She wrote out a letter addressed to the Dalai Lama and sent him to work with the Dalai Lama. He tells me, Mother sent me to Dalai Lama, so the rest of my life I have served Dalai Lama. So she wrote to the Dalai Lama asking him to take this person, and he worked to to create the movies around Dalai Lama, made him famous practically through his initial documentaries and so on. Why did Mother do that? What was this experience? So obviously after this, she saw what was his soul's purpose, what was the deeper karmic or other connections with that tradition, put him on the track. She saw what it was for. So I told him I did an interview. I recorded his description as best as I could. It was not as spontaneous when I recorded, but still he narrated that. Then I asked him, well, after that, have you been to the ashram? He said, no, never. I said, why didn't you come? He hesitated. He says, I want to go. I said, have you been to the mother's room? He said, I want to go, but I'm afraid of being disappointed. Because his reference is this. If he goes today, he will not get this experience, isn't it? Or maybe some part of it might come back in some way. I remember many people saying this to me, and it's a real experience. People went to the mother in her room, and now when they go during the darshan day to the same room, they say, oh, it's so small. When I came, I felt it was huge. Because they were in a consciousness which was huge. Now they go in the normal, ordinary consciousness, hey, it's so small. How did she live in this small room? But I don't remember it being so small. So you understand the value of the experience infused, but also the limits of how far it can be infused before it gets overwhelming. In this case, the mother knew what he was capable of. She gave him the full force of whatever it was, changed him fundamentally, woke him up to some deeper potential that he had. And then because he asked, sent him off on a particular direction, which became his life's mission. So there you are. But you get an idea of why there is a limit to how much can be given. Because our bowl is too small, you fill it too much with the ocean, it shatters. The goal is not to shatter the individuality, but to grow and widen and gradually stabilize into a universality through a graded process. The gradation can be accelerated, but must be graded. If you skip the grades too much, you risk shattering the bowl and destabilizing the person. There are actually cases of the ashram where people had a weak nervous system and too much of the spiritual force destabilized them emotionally or sometimes mentally, and they had to be asked to go. So understand the force is power, intense power, and it can even rupture things if prematurely exercised in intensity. That's why in the spiritual journey, never focus on building intensity, never focus on building power. Build rather the foundation of peace, that's Sri Aurobindo's recommendation, and the deeper psychic influence and discrimination. Let that grow in a deep peace. On this foundation, all the rest, including the power aspect, knowledge aspect, everything can grow. Even the Ananda aspect can grow unendingly. But start with this, which is the foundation always. So a few other comments I will skip. They're all very interesting. And I thank all of you for sharing some of your beautiful experiences with Panditji as well as your comments here. I'm very happy and very grateful. So I will comment with one last observation. Dwarka Nath says that he has appreciated the evenings EWS videos, Evenings with Sraddhalu, and he asks, kindly indicate how I may contribute a little donation. Similarly, France from Quebec asks, you never ask for donations, which I find is a good thing. But if one wishes to make one, to what address, website do you prefer the person to do? So this is the point where I will share with you, because this morning I spoke about it. You see, the house where Panditji stayed, we are renovating it in a major way. It is about 250 years old as far as we know. And many of the beams were damaged. The plaster had been damaged also. They had mixed with cement, and mm, there was a lot of damage. And we feel that protecting the presence and the power, spiritual presence and power which has been built up there is important, and should be available, just as we have benefited from it, should be available down for many generations for others. So we are going through the renovation where the goal is to make it, replaster it with the original lime plaster technology of the ancient days, so that it will last at least another 250 years. That's the intention. So those of you who would like to donate for that, we created a trust when Panditji left his body to maintain the publication of his books and generally the work he was doing, and in this case, the house also. For those of you who would like to contribute, you may freely donate to Deepthi Trust. And in the description box of this video, as well as this morning's video, I have put the information there. For those donating within India, there's a particular account number that works. For those donating outside India, the government of India requires you to use a specific account, which is for foreign contributions. So the information of that has also been given, and you may freely help and donate in that way. And it will be wonderful if we can all participate in the strengthening of this work, which he shared so generously with us, and if we can protect something of that for the future generations. So I think with this, I'm going to close today's discussion on Panditji with one last observation. This morning, you see, the house is half made, half repaired. The old plaster had been stripped out, and the new plaster is not in. And I was hesitating whether we should have the morning session there. The night before, it had rained and the water had been leaking. So I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know what environment it would be for the presence. And it was a beautiful experience for all of us this morning. Despite the fact that the walls were still coarse with rough plaster, despite the fact that the floor was still dirty with all the work that had been going on, the fact that above the beams were wet and the roof was wet with water which has soaked in the day before, that there were no doors or windows, everything was just open and bare. Despite all that, as this morning we all sat in concentration and invocation, the presence came just as beautifully as before. And if you do not look at the walls, you could not make out the difference. And for me, the lesson was this: for the presence, the vehicle does not matter. It can come and fill any space. It is your sincerity of call and opening which matters, whatever may be the physical circumstances. And yet, when the house is properly done, when the walls have been remade with the original lime plaster with a fine, shine, smooth finish, the walls will radiate the presence also, they will participate. But for the presence, it does not matter. It matters for us that the walls can express, that we can integrate that presence into our lives and make perfect our lives and divinize our material world. But for the presence, it does not matter. It can come with the same force, with the same intensity, irrespective of you. If we can make that effort to use that and allow it to lift us, we will grow. And for us, that makes all the difference. Let's make that our effort then. Invoking the presence, giving ourselves an opening to it, and let her work in us, that we may grow more and more worthy of the grace, more and more capable of receiving, containing, and expressing what she gives to us, and living by our own higher spiritual potential. Let that be our aspiration in the example Panditji set for us. Inspired by that, perhaps all of us will, in our own way, in our own lives, feel supported and make a difference to others eventually, perhaps. Happy birthday to all of you, to all of Panditji's family, to all the spiritual family that is gathered now here. Namaste.